Hi, welcome to our 2021 Winter CJS Thursday lecture series. My name is Natsu Oyobe. I'm Curator of Asian Art at the Art Museum. Before welcoming today's guest speakers, I'd like to make a few announcements. Please join us next Thursday, April 15th, for Will Bridges, Associate Professor of Japanese University of Rochester, speaking on epistemology of the violets, heuristics toward a sensorism of Afro-Japanese co-creativity. Also on Thursday, April 22nd, join us and our Toyota visiting professor, Waji Shin, for decolonizing race and ethnicity, understanding racial formation in Japanese society. This is the first of a new series of events from the Japanese Studies Anti-Racist Pedagogy Project. For the programs scheduled in this series, please check out our CJS events page or various social media. Attendee webcams and microphones have been muted for this presentation, but we invite you to use the Q&A function during the lecture to submit any questions you may have. And the presenters will try to address as many as possible. So now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. David Mitchener is curator at the Mafe Botanical Gardens and Nichols Arboretum. He holds a BA in Botany from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and an MA and PhD in Botany from Claremont Graduate School, Claremont, California. After receiving his PhD, he worked at Harvard's Arnold Arboretum before coming to the University of Michigan. At Michigan, David has been engaged with the collections and the broad use in the university community. David is the author of numerous books and articles. For the scholarly community and garden lovers, he is most known for his work on historic peonies. Last year, he co-edited with Robert Grease's Passion for Peonies, a new book about peonies and the Nichols Arboretum Peony Garden. The book takes a deep dive into the cultural, social, and historical context of peonies. Carmen Leskoviansky has been caring for the Mafe Botanical Gardens and Nichols Arboretum's Bonsai and pending collection since 2011. Carmen holds a degree in horticulture and is from Michigan State University. She began studying with American bonsai artist Michael Hagedorn of Cartegas Bonsai in 2018 and will begin a 3-year apprenticeship in May 2021. So in today's talk titled Unseen Artists in the Theater of Timeless Space, Iconic Bonsai Inspire Iconoclastic Futures, David and Carmen will talk about implications and possibilities of their bonsai collection being housed in a teaching institution. So please welcome David and Carmen.
Natsu, thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. I thank you for spending this time with us, and I hope that between Carmen and myself, we help change our understanding of bonsai in a major research university on the world stage. I think we'd like to begin with the presentation, and so the screen will be shared shortly. When you think of bonsai, what comes to mind? Keep that in thought for when we end. This is one of the stunning azalea bonsai that is being gifted to the University of Michigan as part of a significant collection. And in considering this gift and the existing collection we had, the question is, how does this fit in a major university, and what are the many roles that it has in addition to its traditional ones? And the key theme I'd like you to think of here is, in order to have iconic bonsai and iconoclastic futures, We have to have superb strength in classic collections. Next slide, please. Penjing, or as the Chinese antecedent of bonsai is known, began more than 2 millennia ago. It appears in literature almost 2.5 millennia ago. And in 1991, when I was in Jiangsu as part of a joint program with the Jiangsu Academy of Sciences, I was taken to see a number of Penjing collections at temples that had been significantly damaged by the Red Guard during the Maoist era. And the concern was about how to retrieve, restore, and reframe in the public mind these essentially Chinese works in their core position in Chinese culture. Yes, this is the Center for Japanese Studies, but I bring this up that it's in recent history that a core fundamental element was significantly damaged, and it is now a matter of national priority to restore it and reimagine a future. It's stunning. Next slide, please. So as with many things in Japanese culture, and those of you who are historians of Japanese culture know better than I, what we now know as bonsai came to China around 900 AD or before, and that's my understanding is when the first references appear about tray gardens with viewing stones. And this particular image, a reproduction from 1870, is one of the earlier ones which depicts, and you can see it here to the left of the pavilion, a tray with what appear to be what we would call bonsai and landscape scenes of viewing stones and gravels. The culture, the Japanese culture, fundamentally changed what the Chinese concept of penjing was and is into a very specific cultural context. And this is part of the glory of bonsai, of every culture that encounters it, changes it. And this is one of Japan's major contributions to world culture today. Next image, please. Strangely enough, the penjing didn't make much impression on the Jesuits and the French who were in China at the time in the 1700s. It's recorded in some of the works. I know this from having worked through the French journals, trying to do my research on tree peonies in China. But given the political history, bonsai didn't come to the West until the 1870s at the earliest. It's present in the Philadelphia Centennial, marking the first century of this country, only in a reference by description, but it's the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago where bonsai explodes in the American consciousness, especially of the cultural elite. It takes it by storm. Bonsai were presented at the Columbian Exposition because the Japanese government realized that it was something key to the export of Japanese culture, of Japan being a world culture, and of supporting what became more than 300 commercial nurseries in Japan, meeting the Western demand for bonsai. What I find particularly remarkable in this catalog from the early 1900s is that all of a sudden it's women who are being presented affiliated with bonsai in the Western concept. I don't understand that construct and I just put it forward here. Next image, please. The nurseries in Japan were in large part exporting through the Yokohama Nursery Company to the Western United States, as well as a few dealers in Boston and New York. But mostly it was going into family nurseries in Japan up until 1913, when the racist laws of this country prohibited land ownership by Japanese citizens. And here we see Mr. Domoto on the left. His treasures were his bonsai and his tree peonies. The two intersect in almost every institution that has them. Next image, please. In Boston, Lars Anderson, who had been the ambassador to Japan for 2 years, just before he left in 1912 or 13, acquired from the Yokohama Nursery Company 30-some bonsai that he wished to have. He didn't know much about them, but he'd become enamored. He wanted old ones and good ones, and he allowed them to select those which would be shipped to him in Boston. In Boston, they were his private collection. He undoubtedly interacted with Yamanaka and the other Japanese art dealers in Japan who were so in Boston, who were so influential in interacting with Freer and the early parts of our collections here at Michigan. But his collection was more of what I would call a status symbol. And although it had come directly from Japan through a broker, I want to introduce here that there are 2 levels of bonsai already coming into the country by the 1920s. An elite set in Boston, Brahmin, and New York society, and a set into the Japanese nurseries in the West Coast for other purposes, and a broader distribution, but mostly in Japanese communities in the United States and Canada. Next image, please. On Anderson's death, he gives it to his alma mater, Harvard, which is where I came to know this some decades ago, where it's a stunning collection. They are the oldest bonsai in the country, and they are an entity divorced from the life of the academy, a future which, a status which we just can't do here at Michigan. You can go and see them. They're in a different display setup. There are fewer of them now. And this had been the archetype of bonsai collections in the great universities of North America, a thing apart, treated as themselves and not even clear of how to handle them. Up until the 1960s, the way the bonsai were managed was in the biomedical sciences, they looked for any graduate student, preferably doctoral, from Japan and asked them to help care for the bonsai. What a racist attitude that somehow being a Japanese doctoral student in the biomedical sciences, you knew a thing about managing bonsai. Anyhow, we're on a different trajectory here. Next image, please. And after this one, we'll transfer to Carmen because I've set the stage that I wanted for us. And that is the role of Mr. Yashimura. He realized that there was this, what I will call Orientalism amongst Westerners, Americans in particular, that bonsai was an art form that Americans could never do. He realized that bonsai is an art form that any intelligent person could be trained to appreciate. He's enormously influential in the trajectory of bonsai as an art that has meaning, that's about relationships, creativity, and meaning. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Carmen.
Thanks, David. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our collection here at Matthaei Botanical Gardens, as well as bonsai in the United States and some of its cultural significance. So as David said, post-war, things in the United States began to change as far as bonsai is concerned. Here I have 2 pictures. The first is of one of our longtime volunteers, Jack Weichel. He is second from the left. He learned about bonsai first when he was drafted into the Korean War. This is a photo of him in Japan after the war with some buddies. And he brought back the love of bonsai to Michigan in particular. Jack has been incredibly influential with our collection as well as other collections in Michigan and on the national stage. He's been the curator at Hidden Lake Gardens, which is a MSU botanic garden over in Tecumseh, and he is still volunteering with us today. On the right is a photo of the Yamaki pine. This is an incredibly important bonsai in the United States. This was given to the National Bonsai Collection at the National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. This tree survived the bombing of Hiroshima Mr. Yamaki lived only 2 miles away from where the bomb exploded, and his family, as well as their bonsai, did survive. It's incredibly significant that this tree was given as a gift to the United States, and it really helped set the stage for the importance of bonsai here in North America. So jumping over to our collection, the bonsai arrived at the University of Michigan in the late 1970s. In 1977, Dr. Maurice Sievers, who was a director of pharmacology here at the University of Michigan, when he passed away, his wife donated his collection of bonsai to Matthaei Botanical Gardens. On the right, you can see one of his trees, a Scots pine, photographed around 1991. This tree still is in our collection, as well as a number of other trees. And you can see on the right how it looked in 2018 after a number of years of styling and training. When we first received the collection, they were cared for mostly by the Ann Arbor Bonsai Society. They didn't really have a display location here at the gardens. But over time, with the dedication of the volunteers and some interest from our staff, they now have a permanent home in our bonsai and penjing garden. On the left here is a photo of the opening of our garden in May of 2013. And you can see on the right, this was from a year or two ago when we had an azalea show here at the University of Michigan. And this really allowed us to take our collection from an unseen piece of history into UM's public domain. So our display garden opens in April and closes at the end of October. The public is welcome. On the right as well, these trees are from a prestigious donor. His name is Dr. Goldstein. He has collected azaleas and will be gifting this collection to Matthaei Botanical Gardens, which is going to be bringing our collection up on the world stage. He has one of the best collections of azaleas in the country. But why do we do bonsai? What is the meaning of bonsai? What is its purpose here at the University of Michigan? Traditionally, in Japanese culture, there is a focus on form and beauty. Everything from bowing in greeting and the detail in which belongs to that, as well as tea ceremony, formality and form of Japanese gardens. And the same thing plays right into bonsai. The artists work to perfect a technique in a pursuit of beauty. And this beauty is abstract. It's used to ignite imaginations, to put the viewer in a place, in time, in a season, and to communicate a story. There's two ways to look at bonsai, and both are important. Looking versus viewing. Looking is what you as the viewer would do when you see a bonsai on display. This is a right brain activity, creative, artistic. What is your visceral reaction to this composition? Whereas viewing is more of a left brain analytical way of looking at a display that perhaps an artist or someone who's well-versed in bonsai would do. So what's the form? How's the balance? What's the harmony? What's the color? But really, both of these are important. So as far as technique and creating bonsai, viewing for the artist, the creator, is generally what they do. Whereas looking is really telling the story. And stories are important when it comes to bonsai. Each display tells a story, each tree tells a different story, and sometimes the viewer is part of that story. So looking at a display, what story is being told? What elements are here that give you that feeling, that give you that reaction? This is one of my very favorite displays. This is by an American artist over on the West Coast. It's very clear in this picture what is being conveyed? A deciduous tree in fall color near a water source. Many other Japanese displays are slightly more subtle. Very often they will leave out one element of display on purpose to give the viewer a chance to participate in this display. And bonsai isn't just the tree. Sure, the tree is generally the main focus of a display, the main focus of the art form. However, each element plays a role. I included this picture with all of these arrows because bonsai on the outside is very simple, right? It's just a beautiful tree on display for folks to enjoy. However, there are many pieces that go into it. It's complicated, it's detailed. There are elements such as the tree, the scroll, the accent, the little bird, as well as the stand that the tree is on. Oftentimes, the accent will be on a stand as well as the tree. The pot is a piece of this. The distance between the tree and the accent, the distance between the accent and the scroll, the distance between the scroll and the tree. Colors need to harmonize. There needs to be balance. What's the visual weight of all of these objects, the line, the form, the color, the texture, the mass, the scale, the movement. What about other things, such as what's the gender of this tree, of this composition? So ultimately, going back, the goal of bonsai, the cultural significance of bonsai is to tell you a story about a person, a place, an event that happened. What season is it? Where are you? What are the details that are subtle that bring you into this? Using abstract beauty to incite the imagination. This brings up a really important question of whose story is it? And this is a matter of authenticity versus appreciation versus appropriation. There are two displays here. One is from Japan, one is from a North American artist, and it's likely that you can see whose is whose. Authenticity is important in bonsai, understanding the story that you're telling. On the right, with the Japanese display, it's a pretty clearly Japanese display. The mountain is likely Mount Fuji. The trees are of a Japanese variety. This is actually in a show over in Japan. On the left here, it's different. This is not what you would see in Japan. The colors are brighter. The tree is different. Not something you would necessarily see in Japan. The accent is a little stack of stones, something common to come across here in the United States when you're walking or hiking. And so showing this authenticity, telling your story, is incredibly important. Many artists in the United States will use Japanese elements, Japanese techniques, Japanese pots, trees, etc., in their displays as a form of appreciation. We understand Japanese culture fairly well. The Japanese are open to sharing that with us through trainings, through sales, all of that kind of thing. Appropriation is another part of this story. When you don't understand what you're doing, what you're saying with your display, with your tree, creating something that's not authentic, something that's not true to the art can be a real problem, something I've seen a lot here in the United States. How does American exceptionalism play into this? This relates directly with the conversation of appropriation. So American exceptionalism, the idea that we are inherently different from other countries, from other places, that everything that we do is superior simply because we are American, which is not the case. We need to come to terms with our place in the story, particularly as far as representation and appropriation go. This photo on the left is demonstrates something both good and bad. This is a collector getting a juniper off of a mountainside. This is how some of the biggest and best bonsai in the United States are formed, with collected material. Some of these trees are over 800, 1,000 years old. And this is what happens in Japan, or used to, before most of the trees were collected. This is called a yamadori, a wild collected tree. We have amazing material, and this is one of the things that does make us stand out, our native species, the kinds of trees we can find, how they look. It's very different from Japan. At the same time, where are we collecting them from? Much of it is wilderness. However, who used to live on this land? What indigenous people were here before we came? How do they feel about us taking these trees? What happens if these trees die? It's a question that hasn't been answered and is worth exploring. Now, I will say that I believe this is Steve from Backcountry Bonsai. He and Dan, who run this business, are incredibly conscious of some of these issues, and they take the best care of trees. They will not sell them to someone who cannot take care of them. So in that aspect, there is respect, there is appreciation, there is authenticity there. So what are American artists doing that's different? We are turning bonsai into our own form of art. We're using Japanese techniques, Japanese display elements to create something that is inherently not Japanese. This photo on the left here was from the National Bonsai Exhibition in 2019 or 2018. On the right is a display that the Pacific Bonsai Museum put on a few years ago, where they had an artist create paintings that were of the landscape that these trees would have grown in nature. It's a different way of showing trees. It's more bold, but is it bonsai? Yes, the techniques are used. Yes, the elements are there. However, it does kind of take the focus away from the tree. So authentic stories, similarities to Japanese bonsai, but there are different boundaries here in the United States, and we are still exploring what bonsai means to us. David mentioned something about women in bonsai earlier in this discussion. There is an incredible lack of representation as far as bonsai goes. Bonsai is traditionally a male hobby. Japan is a very patriarchal society. This was mostly seen as an older man's hobby and pastime. When the bonsai nurseries began to take on more clientele, it became more of, still the older men were the ones running the businesses, and it was generally passed down from father to son. However, the women have been behind the scenes this whole time. Reflecting back to David's slide, women have helped with watering. They have helped on the business side. They help everything run smoothly so that the bonsai can be made and the business can be successful. On a recent trip to Japan at a nursery, we were shown around by the owners, the father and the son, but when it came to making purchases, we went to the mother and the sister at the store. As far as American bonsai goes, this is translated here. Generally, you'll find a lot of older men doing bonsai. It's very white. And one of the really fabulous things about bonsai at Matthaei has been that the two collection specialists who have worked on these trees have been women. Connie Cranster is there on the left. She was the first one to teach me about bonsai. She has since retired and is living on the west side of Michigan. And I think that this is very different from most places. I can count likely 20 male bonsai artists, professionals, curators, and on one hand, I can count the number of women. This is changing, and that's really fabulous. And I think that one of the things moving forward at Matthaei is how we bring that forward. Breaking barriers. The first woman to apprentice in Japan, her name is Kathy Sheener. She now curates the collection. She is the only other female curator in the United States of bonsai. Some women are still traveling over to Japan to study. Generally, to become a bonsai professional or curator in the United States, you apprentice in Japan, and then come back and start your business. What's also happening is that there are American professionals who have studied in Japan who are taking on apprentices. My teacher, Michael Hagedorn, lives out in Portland, Oregon, and starting in 37 days, I will be beginning a 3-year apprenticeship with him. It's very exciting to be part of this movement of women breaking barriers in bonsai, and I'm very excited to see what other stories can be told. How can we be authentic? How can we bring another voice to American bonsai? David, back to you.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm having fun. I hope you are too. And there are several different threads I now want to braid together here towards the end of our talk. One of them is that there is something called American bonsai, and it's related to, but different from, the canonical specimens. In fact, bonsai are so important on the world stage, even though we may not be aware of it. For example, what is Afro-Caribbean bonsai? It exists. It simply isn't in the elite institutions. This is a world art form from Japan that in the mid-20th century is being reinterpreted and reinflected in every culture it meets. The other one here for our university, the University of Michigan, if I'm a great believer that in order to understand where you are, you have to have canonical elements and collections that show the tradition so that you understand what you are building from. This generous gift by Dr. Goldstein, my understanding is one of the major collections in both the Americas, North and South, is simply one of the most stunning collections of canonical specimens, and it serves as a foil to our emerging collections that Connie helped put together of American bonsai. To my knowledge, there is no other university or even major collector focusing on American bonsai. I'm going to take a step back and ask you to think about ballet. What do you think of American ballet? And how much it's changed in 500 years when Catherine de' Medici brought it over from northern Italy into the French court, and how it changed in Russia, Imperial Russia, Soviet Russia, and contemporary society, unrecognizable for its original culture. We are at this inflection century of 1 century of bonsai in Japan, plus a little more. And this is why we have the opportunity to have iconic collections and what inspires. Aren't these stunning? This is Dr. Goldstein's private home. On the right, this wonderful collection, I ask you just feast your eyes on it. They're not in bloom, but also look at the pots. Next slide, please. When you think of that image I showed from Japan, there were viewing stones as well, and rock trays of gardens. Dr. Goldstein has only the second collection I have seen of viewing stones. I ran into these in Jiangsu. I was stunned. I didn't know anything about them. And it turns out, not surprisingly, that the only other major university in this country that has a viewing stone collection is Harvard, and it's at the Fogg Museum, where it never talks with the bonsai collection. What a loss. These are absolutely fabulous natural objects presented as contemplative pieces that work with the Penjing and bonsai or on their own. I was stunned when I walked into his house. I think I was speechless. Next image 2. So we're adding another element here. Collecting ceramics or stones is something we have a long tradition of doing in Western culture. And here at Michigan, I think in Michigan as a state, I think we often overlook the important role Southeast Michigan and Southern Michigan have had in bringing Japanese arts into North America. Freer certainly did it in Detroit. It's not the only one. And I view bonsai and American bonsai here in Michigan as being in a similar role. This, of course, is the Peacock Room now at the Smithsonian, but as we all know, it was over on Ferry Street for a while, right there 2 blocks from the DIA, now owned by Wayne State. Next image, please. Bonsai are a narrative of multi-generational performance art. They are never static. As Carmen talked about viewing versus looking, there's a composition. As the tree is changed, the pots need to change. You have to have a collection of great ceramics in which to put this as part of the expression. We understand how to think about pots. This is Dr. Goldstein and part of his pot collection. And I believe it goes back about at least a quarter millennium, some of these. He said, you wouldn't believe what this one might fetch in the auction houses in Japan. They're stunning even as themselves. And one of the things I'm hopeful that we will do here in the longer run is have pots on display as themselves in addition to the bonsai. But there's more to it than that. As we look forward from canonical specimens and canonical features, the iconic, and go forward, just to give an example, what's a 3D printed pot in contemporary society? How would students express their understanding of narrative with a particular plant, whether it's a real one or something that is itself 3D printed? How does this come together? This is a deeply humanistic story. Next image, please. And these are things that universities just, and at least in the United States, aren't grappling with bonsai because we put them as a plant in a pot in the horticulture department, if we have them at all. Not interested in that. An artist in Japan, Makoto, has worked as himself and with studios in order to talk about or to present commentaries on our hyper-technical culture and what does it mean for life on Earth. Aren't these just an extension of the pot, in a sense? What is it to have a sustainable environment in which life can thrive? What's the role of humans in this? These are all ways of rethinking, and I think of bonsai and art and engineering as all fusing together in interesting and unimaginable ways, even to us now. Next image, please. It's exciting. The plants are a launching point for thinking creatively. Next slide, about relationships, this one. And I just want to bring this one in about American bonsai again, and that there are Afro-Caribbeans. These are pictures from our own files of the plant at different points because it's important to document. This is the same tree. The upper left shows it looking as something which I will call backyard bonsai, unworthy of a major collection. This is the same specimen, literally having been beheaded by Jack Weichel there in one of the pictures. And in the lower part, you can catch the curvature of the branch. What story's being told? Also notice the pots are changing. What stories will we tell? What will this one look like 250 years from now? That's the story trajectory that we have here. What does a major research university have to say? Next one, please. Let's look back to Japan, contemporary. It's not static with what happens with Japan. Its great artists are trying things. Kimura's presentation here, that's a pot, isn't it? But it's also a commentary. It's a fantasy. What's manga based off of something like this? On the right, this is a performance art where I assume it was a commercial specimen. All the soil was taken away. It was tethered to a meteorological balloon with a video camera. And the performance is this ascending as high up as the balloon could go until it was intentionally exploded at tens of thousands of feet. And then the drama of it descending back to Earth, I think it's part parachuted, and I don't know where it landed. I haven't watched the whole video. I would never have made bonsai a performance art, would you? What's the commentary? As Carmen said, what's the story? Where are we challenging students to think outside the box? Bonsai in its relation to culture and other visual and performance arts is exciting. Next one, please. I'm going to end with this one. It's been known, word of mouth, for generations that bonsai helped the artist. But how do we move this awareness into the clinical world, the peer-reviewed literature, and the potential of bonsai as being used in therapies, whether it's in geriatric wards, orthopedic trauma wards, psychiatric wards, or here in this not even 6-week-old article in the peer-reviewed journals of working with children who have survived genocide. The link is there. You can find it very easily, or we'll post this afterwards. These are very traumatic patient interviews to read. They've been anonymized and I'll say sanitized clearly for the world literature. These are deeply troubling. But this tree on the left is how one child remembers his father and the appalling story of his father's death, because he wants to remember his father as being strong and having beauty. He's using the narrative to change his life and the generations ahead. So our challenge here is, as we think this, and I encourage you into the dialogue of this, of what are the appropriate roles of bonsai in a tier 1 university as this intrinsically Japanese art form explodes on the world stage and goes out of the domain of men with trees and pots into how we make meaning and a sustainable, survivable, emotionally healthy world ahead. So with that, I think there's a return to the first image. I think Carmen and I would welcome questions. Thank you.
Thank you, David and Carmen. It is so exciting to learn about sort of your, all the things you're doing with this collection and bonsai. It's really amazing. So we have a few questions, but before we're going to these audience questions, I have one question to you. So are you actually already in development of university courses using your bonsai collection?
I'll answer that one. Not yet. As Carmen mentioned, we didn't even have a public place for it, and we certainly didn't have a place where students could come. But there's no reason that specimens can't travel to classes or to clinics or to the Museum of Art under the restrictions of bringing live plants into a controlled environment. Excellent question, Natsu. And this is all part of taking bonsai out of being a thing apart, whether it's in a locked exhibit house at Harvard or at Michigan State's Hidden Lake Gardens or the few others of which I know.
I'd like to chime in on that as well. When viewing a bonsai display, there are so many aspects to that in particular, as far as art goes, from scroll making, calligraphy, woodworking, ceramics, not to mention the horticulture of actually maintaining and caring for a tree, the plant sciences. So one of our opportunities being part of a university like U of M is that there are unending opportunities for us to connect with students. Almost any discipline that you can think of has a place in bonsai, which is really exciting. What could an engineering student do as far as a facility, styling a tree? I mean, the possibilities are just endless.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really looking forward to maybe collaborate with, our museum and using our collection and explore these, possibilities. So thank you. So first question I like to read, this is from Roberta Duda. So where can I get some of these pots? Does the gift shop at the Botanical Gardens sell some?
We don't actually sell bonsai materials here. Some of these pots are available at local nurseries. There's one in particular, the Flower Market down in Dundee, Michigan, they have a lot of pots and bonsai for sale. As far as the historical pots, there are online auctions. eBay is a great place to look. Folks, bonsai professionals travel over to Japan to the shows, and they work very closely with some of the bonsai professionals in Japan to import pots and tools, etc. But those ones tend to have a slightly higher price tag.
If I may just add one element to it, Dr. Goldstein has been collecting pots for decades. They're all price levels, as you might imagine. And one of the pots he has, I think I could kneel in, and he had it commissioned from one of Japan's major artists and kilns. So something like that is truly a work of art in and of itself. Thank you. Excellent question.
Okay, so I'll go to the next question. This is from Bridget Cooper. So how do we maintain the essence of Japanese bonsai in an American way, or even in a Michigan way? Dosky stone viewing rocks paired with miniature apple trees, Cherbourg stone viewing rocks, miniature Michigan cherry trees. Just wondering, well, there's so many great ideas.
Carmen, do you want to go first?
Sure. Could you repeat the first part of the question for me?
Oh, so how do you retain sort of an essence of Japanese bonsai in American way?
Sure. So a lot of the folks who have studied bonsai have studied from the Japanese and include many of their elements in American bonsai displays. So bringing that appreciation and authenticity into it, we can keep that sense of a Japanese style, a Japanese feel. There are still also Japanese artists here in the United States. As far as the viewing rocks go, those are similar to scrolls or bonsai or ceramics in that they can be displayed on their own or they can be displayed with a bonsai. The important thing to consider when displaying it with something is scale, balance, weight, all of that to ensure that it's a harmonious piece. But yes, they're very often the smaller ones displayed with trees.
Okay, thank you. It's related to this. I have a question. So, David, you mentioned about paging the Chinese bonsai in a way, and China is trying. It's a national project for them to revive the tradition. And what's the significant difference from Japanese bonsai and the Chinese paging?
Sure. I'm not a trained specialist, but I'll give you my views of it. Many more different styles are accepted as legitimate. Some of them to the point that if they were ballet dancers, I would say they were clinically anorexic. Some of the trees intentionally more dead than live. There's a wider range of plant materials used, I think simply because of the geographic and ecological spread in China and the desire often to use indigenous materials. As Carmen had mentioned, for the American bonsai, using trees from the American wild. So there was that. The other thing is an unrestrained sense of what colors go with what. Polychromatic pots, some of them larger than a pool table, holding complete scenes to which you could almost walk into, down to something the size of your hand. But what I would call the Americans' concept of refined subtlety, yes, it's refined and yes, it's subtle, but I would say it's much the difference between Zen Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism in terms of just a different appreciation. And intriguingly, Dr. Goldstein is one of the world's experts on Tibetan culture. I hope that answered the question at a naive level.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you. So the next question is from Evan. So his question is, how do you properly get into bonsai as an individual absolutely enamored by the art and culture? rather than someone trying to become a curator?
Sure. Generally, people go into bonsai as opposed to curation to begin with, at least. There are a number of different ways. Probably the most straightforward one would be to join a local club, since there are a number of people there who have different levels of experience, different materials to work with, and can work with you pretty closely. There are professionals within the United States you can take classes from. That's how in 2018, I started studying with my teacher, Michael Hagedorn, and that was what they call a seasonal program. So for 2 years, you travel to work with them 4 times a year for 3 days at a time. So these seasonals range in, price and length, but that is a possibility. There is a ton of online material, particularly from some of the artists and nurseries. That's your most reputable source, is to get a membership with one of those and do their educational videos, live streams, that kind of thing. YouTube is a scary place. Some of the things there are helpful and many of them are not. So learning how to weed through all of that kind of comes later. So I would say local club, professionals for one-on-one, or online content.
If I could have one other comment in there. Major museum collections, and increasingly the major gardens are going this way, the curator of a collection cannot own or broker the material which they curate. By which I mean, if we were part of the Smithsonian, Carmen would not be able to have a private bonsai collection where it was a conflict of interest for did she procure it for herself or for the institution. We're not quite there yet with this one, but I would say if your passion is bonsai, go into bonsai. If the curatorial thing were to open up, think about it, but there are restrictions too.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Kay. So what are the best plants for bonsai? And kind of related to my question is that, so what kind of trees kind of survive Michigan's winter?
Sure. There are so many trees and plants that you're able to bonsai. They're not always just tree species. You can do shrubs, you can do woody perennials, tropicals. Probably the easiest place to start is with a tropical, a ficus. Those you can easily grow indoors over the winter with lights. They grow fast, they're hard to kill. You can cut them all the way back to their stump and they will regrow. It's a good one to learn on. As far as temperate trees, Michigan is unique in some of its native species. Our white cedar are amazing. If you go up north to the Porcupine Mountains, you can find wild specimens there hanging off of cliffs, swamps, your own backyard, you might find something. Larches, maples, dogwoods, almost any of the native species in Michigan you can at least practice with. The thing that you are looking for in particular when creating a bonsai is leaf size to the size of the tree. Scale is important. Being able to reduce leaf size or something that has a small leaf to begin with can be very helpful. So creating something like a horse chestnut who has a leaf like this, you probably won't have much luck.
So one other element I'd like to add is, as part of bonsai into the world, there are also tropical species used. There was so much we could talk about. We have some of the Meislich bonsai here at U of M. Dr. Meislich specialized in ficus. Rubber trees is the way you might think of them. They're stunning. And because they're tropicals, you can grow them indoors year round. So they don't need to survive the Michigan winter. And there is a serious collector and creator of Sri Lankan bonsai in Southeast Michigan. So all kinds of things can work. But as Carmen says, scale is important.
And for Michigan, if you're growing trees, if you want to do temperate trees, definitely pick something that's cold hardy. They can survive Michigan winters with protection.
Okay, thank you. So this question is from Rose. As a complete novice, would you recommend that I try to start my own plant, or should I buy an established plant to work on?
I would always say to start with an established plant. If you're starting with a seedling, it will take you at least 5 years to be able to work on it, because you need a tree that has some kind of age and branching to it before you can really do the work. So buying something that's called a pre-bonsai is a great option. It's something that has been grown with the specific purpose of becoming a bonsai. Some of the original or the first branch selections have been made. So from there you can wire it, style it, do your own pruning, and start to create something that is yours. A lot of bonsai artists use material that is collected, so hundreds to thousands of years old, or trees that have been grown for the purpose of becoming a bonsai. Sometimes you will find somebody working to breed a better species of maple, and so in that case, seedlings are important, but to just begin with a bonsai, I would start with some kind of at least partially established tree. Thank you.
So this question is from Mari. So what is the oldest bonsai at Matthaei? The biggest one? And also she's curious about nutrition reporting. I guess this question is about like in general.
Sure. So there's a difference between oldest tree as a bonsai and oldest tree as far as age goes. The oldest tree, the tree that has been a bonsai the longest, is likely the Seaver's Scots pine that I showed earlier in the presentation. That's been in a pot, I believe, since the 1960s. So as a bonsai, that one has been in a pot the longest. As far as the oldest tree, we have a collected Rocky Mountain juniper that's estimated to be between 800 and 1,000 years old, collected off of the mountains. So there is a difference there. It's only been a bonsai for, I don't know, probably under a decade. As far as nutrition goes, fertilization is important. Controlling fertilization, knowing when to fertilize, when to hold off is very important. Organics are good, mostly because they have a lower number, a lower NPK ratio. You can use regular fertilizer at half strength as well. Soil plays into it, but that's a whole other discussion.
So in relation to that question, we'll have quite a different answer with the arrival over in iterative waves of Dr. Goldstein's specimens, because there will be a number of sublime plants that are over a century old. That is a century in training, not just a century in age. And certainly age is important, but just because something is old doesn't necessarily mean it's it's distinguished. And that's what I was trying to allude to about what's happened sometimes with collections that go stagnant. Because once they just become a thing to be managed, an object apart, they lose their living continuity of a narrative. And that's important because the plant is ever changing. So the story is ever changing. You just can't freeze this. So one of the questions that I see, and I'm just going to dive in about how did the narratives change over time? Well, that's including soldiers' wives in Japan. That's one of the undiscussed elements and uncollected, to my knowledge, elements of American bonsai history. It's fascinating, and we're getting here into gendered studies, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the whole thing. And that's why it's so important to have a canonical collection and then the expressions from it. And we're better than in one of the great research and humanities universities of the world, the University of Michigan. Back to Natsu.
I will say real quick too that the Rocky Mountain juniper that's over 800 is from Mel's collection. It's one that he donated to just before COVID 2 years ago.
Wonderful. So it's past 1 o'clock. There's just a compliment here, but is it okay if I continue several questions from my own? Because I'm so excited about Carmen. You're going to really, well, you are taking care already, you know, the bonsai collection, but also you're going on to this apprenticeship. And I wonder if you can talk more about your what are you going to do and what are you looking forward to doing the apprenticeship?
Yeah, sure. So I'm trying to figure out where to start with this one. So it's a 3-year apprenticeship. It will involve me moving to Portland, Oregon, and living on site at the bonsai nursery there. Here, I'm maintaining a small appointment here so I can continue to be involved with our collection. We're incredibly lucky that Jack Sustick, who is the former curator of the National Bonsai and Penjing Museum in Washington, D.C., he has retired to Michigan, and he will actually be coming in a couple days a week to help maintain the collection in my absence. My goal with the apprenticeship is to refine my skill and technique and learn more about Japanese culture and bonsai significance in that culture so that I can come back to the university and have the skills needed to properly care for a collection of this magnitude, and really be just a better ambassador overall for bonsai, what it is, where it's going, and that kind of thing. Oh, you're muted.
Muted. Okay, so there are more questions coming. Yeah, this question is from Valerie. She said, this is her comment, I'm concerned about the people collecting specimens from the wild. So yeah, that was my kind of question too, that so sort of ethical, issues surrounding collecting plants from the wild. And so what is the ethical way of, really dealing with bonsai also?
Sure, that's a great question. As far as collecting off of public lands, permits are required. Location, like all the knowledge of where you're going and what you're doing is required. You can get a permit. A lot of folks have friends, family who own land, farmers, ranchers, that kind of thing, and will get permission to go and do that kind of thing. Yes, there are people who poach and take trees that they shouldn't be taking from places they shouldn't be taking them. But mostly the people who are in the business of collecting and selling trees do go through the right channels. But this does also play back into that, whose trees are these, whose land is this? And that raises a whole other set of ethical questions that the bonsai community has not yet addressed.
So I guess Reggie has a question. Do you want to unmute?
Yeah. I'll just unmute. I can mute the hi. Thank you guys so much for the super interesting presentation. I learned so much, and I had no idea about any of these things. So I'm really glad to benefit from your expertise. This goes back to something that you were saying, David. I'm really fascinated by this notion of narrative, like in the practice and how that plays out, but also this theme of styling and training. And so I was just wondering in this light, if you could say more about how this played out in the push for soldiers' wives to adopt bonsai practice after World War II. You talked a little bit about the gender of things, but then I'm just thinking about this notion of training bodies and training, in this case, women to assimilate in some ways, but also maintain this kind of Japanese cultural identity. And so if you could, anything that you have to say on that topic, I think would be really interesting. Thank you.
Reggie, an excellent question. There's probably at least 3 dissertations in there. I don't know the primary literature for this. I get from the tertiary literature, that is the histories of bonsai societies, that this is what happened, but it's usually a narrative at this point now, a history written by men, when the articles are listed for who wrote them, about their understanding of how it happened. And yet I look at some of the bonsai that been offered or collected over the years that were assembled in the 1950s, and it's clear that women were involved. I really don't know. It's one of these fascinating elements of cultural history in Japan, and how many of these were what I will call Japanese wives of American soldiers, and how many of them were occupying wives of occupying soldiers who were Americans who got transferred over there. I just don't know. If I look at the parallels to American garden design in the 1950s, there was often this desire to put this Japanoid element in it, little footbridges or lanterns that were totally devoid of context, meaning, or any aesthetic sense of how they added to a narrative. And I don't know if that's how, quote, the bonsai were treated. And I've also wondered if this is where the reputation of bonsai being easy to kill came, of maybe people tried it who weren't terribly interested in the bonsai to begin with, but they needed to take a class or whatever it was, and that it ties into there. And I hope that it intrigues you even more. And it also makes me
does.
race and class in the spouses here as well, of who's doing what. And what a number of years back, I was with our education coordinator at the Charles Wright Museum of African American Culture in Detroit. And one of the questions that came up was the possibility of having a bonsai show. And I thought to myself, because I was being very naive, and I'll call it race-based at that point, of why would a bonsai collection be of interest at the Charles Wright Museum? And that's part of my journey about this is a world art form that speaks to all cultures. And it is a narrative and a performance and so much. Thank you for a great question.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. All right, sorry to interrupt.
Okay, so this is a question I wanted to ask, and also from Robin. As for viewing the Matthaei collection, is it now open to the public? Are there any capacity restrictions or reservations to be made given COVID? Also, when is the best time to see it?
I realized I was muted. We're currently closed due to COVID. We're waiting for numbers to go down for university direction that it is safe to open. If you follow us on Facebook or Instagram, we do put some photos up there as we can. I believe our spring azalea event will be online this year. The best time to see them, really any season is good. They change by the week, by the month, by the season. So come spring, come summer, come fall. Winter is the only time that the garden is closed because the trees are put away in cold storage for the winter. However, we do have a conservatory display that will be housing tropicals mostly, but also some other trees that may be here on special exhibit, some of our other trees that are looking great. And that will be open year round once we reopen. David.
So I'd like to just add to that I view bonsai, having a bonsai collection is a lot like having a dance troupe. Who's on stage right now, who's recovering, who's in the hospital because they were anorexic and preparing for that key role. And bonsai are much the same. And we are distinctive, to my knowledge, in bonsai collections of we have what's being presented, and you can stand and look at all the rest of the specimens, which is at least 80% of them, that are not on display because they haven't yet been groomed for that being on stage moment. And as Carmen indicated, some are stable in what I will call stage worthiness for longer periods than others. The azaleas, when they're in bloom, that's what, 3 to 7 days, depending upon the weather. They're still beautiful, but it's that moment and it's that ephemerality that makes them so phenomenal. Great questions.
Thank you. In relation to that, so can we visit Peony Garden this year?
The peony garden will be open to the public. We're not promoting anything. It's not a major thing, but next year is our centennial of the Peony Garden, and we will be celebrating the bonsai collection as well. All this, the first weekend of June. The meeting I just came out of was another planning meeting for that great weekend of June 4th and 5th, 2022. So enjoy it this year, but we're really getting ready for the big party.
Well, great. And I don't see any other questions. Yeah. So yeah, well, thank you, David and Carmen. This is really great. We learned so much. So yeah, hope to see you soon in person, maybe at the, bonsai garden. So, well, thank you. Have a good day, everyone.